Hello everyone. This is a very special time of year. We're right in the middle of the Chagim. We're moving towards Succot, and that's what we'll talk about today. So most of the Divrei Torah tonight will be said in the name of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. It's in his book Horeb, the Horeb. It presents a philosophy of the Jewish mitzvahs and the observances. So that's what we're looking into. So you get this Sukkah, and like not only the Chag of Sukkah, but the actual mitzvah of Sukkah, the edifice of Sukkah. So he kind of recalls, and this is a fairly common idea, that like what is the lesson we learn from Sukkah? And very commonly quoted, oft quoted, and this is of course a very deep truth of Sukkah, so it's important to mention, is that this is actually a de-emphasis on the material. That is to say, this is a time of year when our grains start to become full. We bring in our harvest, right? Our storehouses are full. We feel very confident about the winter coming ahead. And even so, Jews move out into their sukkahs, right? Because we show who sustains us, who does our sustenance, who does our sustenance really come from? From God, right? And that is the lesson of Sukkah, that even if your storehouses are full, just recognize who it really comes from. So that is lesson one, right? But on the other hand, what if your harvest didn't go well? Now you have these meager provisions, your storehouses are far from full, and winter is coming, and you have your family to feed, and things aren't looking so good. Even so, move into the sukkah, because who sustains you? God sustains you. Your storehouses don't sustain you. That's just, I guess, the medium through which God operates. You don't worry, rely on God, go into your sukkah, all will be well. That is one of the lessons of Sukkah. So we see that regardless, we leave our solid house and depend on HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a remembrance of the fact that the Jewish people, our ancestors, relied on God for 40 years in the desert, and God protected them and sheltered them, and so too will He protect us and shelter us. That is a central mitzvah of Sukkah. Whether or not you're wealthy, whether or not you're poor, just realize what is the place of your physical wealth and acquisitions. They're for a specific purpose, but don't let that purpose blind you to your relationship to God, and therefore we move out into the Sukkah. That is lesson one. Juxtaposed to this, or perhaps, and certainly working together with the mitzvah of Sukkah, is what's the other major mitzvah of the Chag HaSukkot? Is lulav, the arba minim. We take 4 species. We take the lulav, etrog, hadas, and arava, right? The myrtle, the date palm, the citron, and the willow branches, and we combine them all together. And actually, we're supposed to acquire them. That comes from the pasuk. It's in the sefer Vayikra, chapter 23, verse 39, which defines the 15th of Tishrei. And then it says in verse 40, "Ulkachtem lachem b'yom harishon pri etz hadar kapot marim v'anaf eitzavot v'arvei nachal." Right? Right? You shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of a citron tree, etc. So when it says you shall take for yourselves, actually the mitzvah, especially on the first day, it's the only day we actually have a mitzvah deoraita to take the arba minim is actually on the first day of Sukkot. The only time it was 7 days, to the extent of my knowledge, is actually when it was in Jerusalem, I think, with the temple. Regardless, for the vast majority of us, the only time it's actually a mitzvah deoraita is the first day. And we see from this lesson of ulkachtem lachem, and you shall take for yourselves. What does lakecha here mean? It means acquisition. We're meant to buy the arba minim. That's actually a central feature of the mitzvah. And that's what you have to do. And so, well, how does that interact? And we just said de-emphasis on material goods, de-emphasis on the physical, move out into the sukkah and rely on God for your material possessions. He'll take care of us. So how does these two things work together? Says Rav Hirsch, amazingly, and I just have to read his words. I mean, they're translated. He originally wrote it in German. Then I'm actually not sure if it went from Hebrew into English or directly from German to English. I think this is directly from German to English. The translation was by Rabbi Dayan, Dr. I. Grunfeld. I think his name is Isidor Grunfeld. I think he was British. Obviously, he had some German roots. And he translates as follows, the words are from Shimshon Hirsch. If the observance of Sukkah during the festival of Sukkot frees us from the bonds with which we tie ourselves to worldly possessions as the basis of our life and the anchor of our hopes, if it teaches us humility, despite our material wealth, and trust in God even without it, then the observance of lulav causes us to rise to things higher. Simcha, rejoicing before God in all that He has bestowed upon us. The sukkah negates material possessions as ultimate value. The lulav links us again with our dependence upon goods and chattels. So we see this dual message. And then he goes on, the sukkah teaches us not to appraise too highly our worldly goods, the lulav to value them at their true worth. So again, we see this double message. The sukkah de-emphasizes, and the lulav kind of reasserts the importance of material possessions framed in the proper perspective. Moving on, the sukkah raises us above our property to God alone. The sukkah raises us above our property to God alone. The lulav teaches us to be imbued with the Spirit of God, and even to exalt our possessions as God-given. The sukkah prevents us from becoming too earthly. The lulav reminds us not to soar too high above the earthly. So again, we see, don't debase yourself. You're not fully ingrained within the earth. You're not fully tied to material possessions. At the same time, don't so fully disconnect yourselves. You need to use those material possessions to engage in a relationship with God. The sukkah protects us from being debased by our wealth. The lulav teaches us to cherish our possessions and dedicate them to sacred purposes as the gift of God. The lesson of the sukkah is that the acquisition of goods is not the sole aim of life. The lulav teaches us to apprehend goods as instruments for our way of life before God. And so it brings us simcha, joy in living before God in a life of godliness. For if life is understood thus, it makes no difference whether you attain much or little. The assessment of your life lies in whether you have lived it dutifully with your much or your little. From this wells up the eternally joyful fountain of life sublime in the service of God, of simcha before God, of that happiness which rejoices him who possesses much or little as the gift of God by which he can fulfill the will of God on earth. The happiness of living in the presence of God, your God. A happiness, the simcha, right? It's zman simchatenu, which is as eternal as life itself and as God who is its source. That is the dual message of living in the sukkah, of de-emphasis on material, and lulav, of putting it in its proper perspective. And just as a final note, says Rav Bernstein in his, at the end of his Teshuva sefer, where it connects all these ideas, this is to say, where since sukkah follows Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we see from this that it actually follows that this is an implementation of what we've learned through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah, we crowned God as king. We said, we are your subjects. We have to fit into your world, God, according to how you envision us. You're the king, we're the subject. We need to fit in according to your plan. Yom Kippur, which just passed, right, we are giving a detailed accounting of how we failed to live up to that vision. But now that we've done that, and how we've connected inappropriately to the physical world, now we have Sukkah. And the mitzvah of Sukkah and Lulav together, of the Chag Sukkot, puts us into a proper frame of mind. We depend upon God. We build that specific relationship. We take the lulav. We use that as an acquisition. Right? We have to acquire. We have to use our material wealth in order to get this mitzvah, and that's how we come before God. That is to say, with the Arba meaning, there's the mitzvah of the Hidur mitzvah. The place of Hidur mitzvah takes a special role in Sukkot with the Arba meaning. With other mitzvahs, it's a hidur, it's a beautification. The mitzvah isn't puzzled by the fact that you haven't done the hidur mitzvah. But if there's a certain lack of hidur mitzvah in with the Arba minim, they're actually completely puzzled. They're totally not kosher. You can't fulfill a mitzvah with Arba minim that are disgusting effectively and are lacking in hidur. A certain level of hidur. It needs to be really bad. Speak to your local Orthodox rabbi who'll give you proper guidance. Okay. Anyway, so the central theme here is not that of merely performing mitzvahs, but of reclaiming them from the sidelines to which they've been relegated and pushed aside by things that are less important. And therefore we see that the things that we make beautiful are things that are of ultimate worth and of ultimate meaning. That is a central idea of the Arba meaning. And that's the reorientation of Sukkot. That earlier, the Sukkah and the Arba meaning work together as a team, as we just said, with Sukkah de-emphasizing physical priorities that may have taken over, and Arba meaning restoring mitzvahs to the center where they belong. And there's another layer here, that after all, we know there's a hidur mitzvah with Arba meaning, but the way we learn about Hiddur Mitzvah and its importance is through a pasuk in the Song of the Sea, right? The Shirat Hayam, where it says, Zeh Eli ve'anvehu. This is my God and I'll glorify him, right? And so the Gemara expands and says, that means Hitna lafanav mitzvahs, right? Beautify the mitzvahs before him. But if we look carefully, Hitna lafanav mitzvahs does not mean beautify the mitzvahs before him. It means beautify yourself before him with mitzvahs. And that is a central feature of the Arba Minim. We need to ask, what makes you look good? What do you take pride in? If it's mitzvahs, then you're in good ground. And that's a central feature of the Arba Minim and of Sukkot, and how these two components of Chag HaSukkot come to play together and actually help guide us from Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to the practical actualization of those ideas. Chag Sameach, and of course Shabbat Shalom, and you should rejoice.